Being dyslexic takes all your power away. You know, these were lovely youngsters, and they were just getting sucked back into gangs again, and I was losing them. They weren't going on where they were supposed to be going. They were disappearing again. You know, they'd been truanting from school. You know, dyslexics, certainly state school kids, will often start truanting at the age of 11 or 12. Nobody talks about that, but I know, because that's what was going on. And that was what was going on when I was teaching when I was the SENCO teaching, I had those 60 odd kids to teach to read, because they were coming back. And I don't think the head was very pleased, actually, but they were coming back. They had found out that somebody would teach them to read. And, you know, and they were sending their sisters and their mothers to interview me. You know, was I for real? Was I going to teach them to read? Well, back they were coming. And so it's so important. I mean, prisons are full of dyslexic people that really, if you took all the dyslexic people out of prison, we'd have a really big housing problem, wouldn't we? But I am all too well aware that 1/4 of the UK kids are not reading at their own age when they get to secondary school. They're already struggling, and clearly these are dyslexic kids who need the techniques.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Soul Bytes show. I am your host, Bolaabimbola, frequency alchemist, energy practitioner, and life coach. And Daily Soul Bytes is where we interview guest authors, coaches, and entrepreneurs from the fields of spirituality, psychology, and leadership, sharing their insights for the expansion of collective consciousness. And today I have a very special guest right here in the UK with me, Esther de Burgh. Welcome to the show, Esther.
Thank you, Bola. Thank you for having me.
Really nice to have you, Esther. I will read your bio before we start. So Esther de Burgh is a teacher, an advocate, and a writer. She runs the Dyslexia Techniques Practice here in the UK and has over 30 years experience teaching children with special educational needs, most especially dyslexia. Today we explore Esther's method of teaching learners with dyslexia to read and comprehend what they have read. Having dyslexia is something that I know many of us have experienced or have somebody who has that condition. I am really pleased that Esther is joining us today. So tell us, Esther, well, I can see your cat in the background there. That's really lovely.
I knew she'd make her appearance just when there was nothing we could do about it. She's the diva here, not me, it's her.
That's lovely. So tell us, Esther, what led you to this place? Because there are lots of journeys, lots of paths, and having a path that is around teaching, around dyslexia, what led you to this place? If you just give us a brief summary.
I didn't necessarily plan to teach. My plan was actually to be a school counsellor. My idea was to go and teach and get the 2 years experience and then do the psychology degree and in fact, I did that. I did the 2 years and went and got the psychology degree. Teaching is in my blood, actually. My grandmother was a head teacher. My dad trained to be a teacher and then he became a vicar. So we've got teachers and doctors in our family. I'm always very interested in anything medical and so on as well, but that's quite good, because having been a dyslexia tutor to over 1,000 students where you're sitting one-to-one, sometimes you just want to talk about something other than dyslexia with them for that hour. So, you know, teaching's in my blood. It's in fact, I really noticed it because when I was I had a chance to be, well, when I was a SENCO, I had to do a lot of management. And it really annoyed me that it was taking me away from teaching. And then later, when I became a Skills for Life coordinator at FE College, again, I'm doing an awful lot of, I'm training people and I'm sort of overseeing things. But I really would have loved to have done more teaching. And so, because there's something about teaching where, especially if you're teaching something important that's important to the other person, it's really like, it's like if you're two and your mum gives you a box of chocolates and says, go and hand it around. everyone's so grateful to you. It's not, and you're just giving something that is easy to give. So teaching, and then you watch someone benefit. So to me, I've always found it a great privilege to be a teacher. Then the next thing is, I think this is the first I knew of dyslexia. They were in my English lessons. Not many back in those days. That was in 1990. But very, very distressed dyslexic children. And I found it quite distressing because nobody knew how to help them. Nobody had any. We had this special needs teacher, and she would sit them down and write their essays for them. And you'd always knew if it was a Sharon essay. This is from Sharon. So it was. So then I thought, okay, I'm going to go and find out how to help them. Because we've got tears, we've got paper aeroplanes flying around, and this was very civilized compared to today. So after a year studying, I went on the OCR, Specific Learning Difficulties evening course, where you have to teach an adult, you have to teach a secondary school kid, you have to teach a primary school teacher, and you have to hold down your job. And I think it's the only year I've ever run out of petrol. I was like, so many things to try to remember to do. I was in the middle of nowhere once. Luckily, a very nice lady, I knocked on her door and she drove me to a petrol station. So it was a really stressful year doing that. And then coming back and thinking, now I'm going to be able to do something about these kids. The only thing that I knew, the only technique they had taught us that there was going back then in 19 was it was a spelling technique, and it was called look, say, cover, write, check. And it actually used the voice, and it actually worked. It really did help with spelling. After a few years, I was a SENCO, and I chose the toughest school. The school was in turmoil. And there were 65 kids whose reading age was 5 years below their chronological age, 65. So I was delighted because this is what I was. And by this time, I'd developed a technique for teaching the non-readers to read. Why it was working was because it took me some time to work out precisely what aspect, because there's a whole lot of things that they're doing. They're writing, they're reading, they're speaking, they're reciting. But actually, the key thing is using their own voice in their own words or in their own way, and while they're reading. And that was when it was going in.
Honestly, I think, finding something that we are interested in, something that we can offer, and then finding that it's something that is needed, something that everybody or certain people around us also want. That is synchronicity. And it's really a sign for us, I think. I found that in my life as well, where something that I have, something that I enjoy to do is also something that other people are around me wanting to have as well. So that is very fulfilling. So thank you for sharing that. So if we go on to what is dyslexia, if you just give us a definition of what dyslexia is and the kind of life that one can expect when they have dyslexia.
Okay, well, if you've got dyslexia, you can end up with a first-class honours degree and a fantastic job, and having the life that anyone has, providing you know the techniques. And that's what's on my website, and that's what's in my book. And this is what I'm here on planet Earth now. Before I sort of take my departure, is to actually spread these techniques around, because I have spent over 20 years with over 1,000 students, plus kids, some private teaching, plus the 10 years when I was at school. And you see the difference. You and I, we can read upside down, but we don't like reading upside down. That's how it feels. That you have just got to read it, and that you can do it, but it's going to take you longer.
If I'm say 18 years old, and I know I've been struggling with reading in some way, shape or form, what is the definition, or what characterizes dyslexia from other specific learning difficulties? It's a learning
Right.
difficulty. What are the different aspects, or how does it come across? How would you know? What symptoms do you look out for?
Dyslexia comes in different strengths, levels of intensity. It comes regardless of intelligence. You can be Einstein and with dyslexia, or you could be in a special school with dyslexia. It's a specific learning difficulty because it's actually specific to the task. You know, a dyslexic person could pick up learning about an engine faster than a non-dyslexic person, but they're not going to be able to learn a poem off by heart so quickly. And this is because the very, very specific problem is processing sound with meaning. So I'll come back to that. So dyslexia is affecting four main areas: reading, writing, arithmetic, language learning. And all of these four areas have one thing in common that, for example, learning how to use a camera does not have in common. And that is you have to process sound with meaning. You can't do one or the other. You have to process sound with meaning. And the dyslexic is actually, if you looked at their processing, there's sometimes processing sound with meaning, but a lot of the time they're only processing sound or they're only processing meaning. And that means that there's these gaps. So when they're, learning their times table, very difficult for the dyslexic. Learning poetry off by heart. So for example, it's going to take the dyslexic longer to learn to read, but even if the dyslexic can easily read every word in the book, they're still going to have worse reading comprehension, which I'll explain in a minute. And they're going to, they might be able to have fantastic handwriting and be able to spell everything. They're still going to have difficulties writing with expression, actually expressing themselves. And this is because of the fact that that they're only processing either sound or meaning most of the time.
Thank you so much for really talking about what dyslexia in particular is. So if you could just give us a breakdown of what your technique is called and how it does help those who have dyslexia.
Yeah, well, they're called own voice techniques. So, for example, with reading comprehension, now we know that the dyslexic is going to have a strength. We know that we've all got two processes. We've all got Broca's area and Wernicke's area. Broca's area, in our language area, Broca's area processes sound and Wernicke's area processes meaning. Those two, when they're working together, it's kind of like if you imagine a word, you're picking it up with chopsticks. You've picked it up with both chopsticks and you've got that word. If you're dyslexic, you're trying to pick up something with one chopstick. And I think another analogy, which is a good one, is you know when the sewing machine, if you've got a line of sewing that you've just done, if you hadn't threaded it up well, you could pull one thread and then the other one would fall away from behind. So the two threads are holding each other together, and that is really, I think, quite a good metaphor for what's going on in the brain with sound and meaning. The sound and the meaning hold that word in your memory. And if you haven't got it held there, it's not going to go up to your long-term memory even. So that's another thing about dyslexia is memory. Dyslexics all think they've got bad memories. And in fact, they've got perfectly good memories, nothing unusual about their memory, except actually they've got very good visual memories. They've got visual strengths. But when it comes to actually they read a story or they heard a story, and hearing is, the dyslexic is also affected in hearing because their brain is processing the words they hear just as much as the words that they read. And as such, they're going to have more problems retaining that the next day unless they've put it through into their own voice. Because now you've chosen your own words. You've just read a paragraph and somebody said, well, what was that all about? And you said, oh, it's about, you can still look at it, but you put it into your own words. You've just programmed your memory to remember that paragraph forever. You know, that dyslexic is going to walk out and they're going to not believe how well they remember that piece of writing, because they're used to not remembering it by the next day. Because what's happened is that they've got a bit of a thread of sound and a thread of meaning. And what they can do and what they should do, and I always tell them to do this after lectures, is talk about it. Because as soon as because it's there in a very short-term memory store, that memory store evaporates overnight. Except I once met one who talked in her sleep, and she was coping a lot better with memory. So if a group of dyslexics, the best thing they can do is go and have a coffee and talk about a lecture straight after the lecture, and really try and keep on task and talk about what was in the lecture, and then they will remember it the next day. And it will. And I say to them, you know, if you're writing that lecture up, don't leave it to the next day. If you do it that day, it's really easy because it's all there. But it's all uncommon threaded unless they've put it into their own words. So something that they can do if they haven't got people to meet for a coffee with is they can go for a walk and dictate their memory of the lecture onto a recording. And just that alone, they don't even have to listen to the recording. That alone has really set it into, you've threaded up those two threads, and now you've got a solid memory that's gone into your long-term memory. So, you know, these are all issues for the dyslexic. And, you know, so the more they can put into their own words that, you know, so it's not just into words, it's into their own words. Now it's all happening. So, for example, if you're revising, you read it for meaning. So when you're reading it for meaning, the process is in the language area. In fact, I say it's like that. They're working like that.
What are they?
One is working then Broca's area and Wernicke's area. Broca's, Wernicke's. Now, after a few years, I suddenly realized that what was happening is that when one closes, it's still working a bit. It's still effective. So there's a tiny bit of parallel processing each time there's a changeover. Each time, so the more often that happens, the better for the dyslexic, because the more parallel processing was going on. Now, when the dyslexic is speaking, you've got complete parallel processing. These two processes are going like the clappers, and now neither of them is cooling down, and now you have got parallel processing of sound and meaning. And that is what they all want. Now, they are no different from a non-dyslexic. And that is what's been their problem.
That's really brilliant. Thank you, Esther. I think it's important to clarify, because there are some of our learners who do have severe learning difficulties, and some who do have neurotypical learning, you know, who have neurotypical learning skills, but just have that particular specific learning difficulty of dyslexia. Can your technique help those who have severe learning difficulties, or it's going to be difficult for those who have severe learning difficulties to have that parallel processing of sound and meaning?
Anybody who is able to choose their own words and speak, who is dyslexic, of however severe, that's going to bring them right back into you know, where they want to be. I once had he was the most dyslexic person I've ever met, and he'd learn all of his sounds, but he couldn't read. He couldn't put the sounds together. And this is another technique that I teach, is that you keep the sound in the voice. So as soon as I have to actually come up with another metaphor for this, and that's the stepping stones. Now, if you are trying to cross a pond, and there's no stepping stone. First of all, you find one to stand on, and from there you can lean over and make the next stepping stone, and then you've got two, and then you go on to the second one, and from there you can lean over and make the third stepping stone. Now, this is a metaphor for using your own words to decode a word. So so take this guy, he wouldn't have been able to read crocodile, but he could have said crocodile. He could have done that. Now, what I taught him to do, and this is what I teach all of them to do, is first to say the first bit aloud. So you go cr. And now cr has gone into your long-term memory and you can use it. Otherwise, it's still shaking around and it's still two threads and you can't use it. So no dyslexic, phonological dyslexic anyway, that does the surface is another kind of dyslexia. They cannot, by definition, look at a word they've never read before, like crocodile, and go, oh, that says crocodile, because they can't. The second sound, which would be cr-ok, that second sound, they can't concretely decode it until they've got the first sound, and they can't have the first sound until they've used their own voice, because their own voice then substantiates it. So they could just look at crocodile all day long and they'd be up in front of the firing squad and they still couldn't read it. You know, sorry, mate, out you go. But if they've gone croc, croc, crocker, crocod, crocodile, and then I once had a youngster, he was about 17 and he couldn't even read detective and he didn't know his vowel sounds. And I said, okay, let's just go for it this way. And he went, detoctav, and then he knew. Then he said, "Oh, detective," right? So it's that middle stage, and again, it's using your own voice in your own way, and now you're putting stuff up into the part of the brain where it should be going in order to start working for you.
That distinction, that when you do want to use that technique, it's important that you are already verbal to an extent. Now, if you have someone who has a parent who has a 3-year-old or even a 2-year-old who is really, they're trying to teach that child to read. They're finding it a bit of a struggle. What are the signs they can look out for that will tell them that this is a dyslexic child, that they probably do need to connect with you?
I think I was reading by the time I was 3.5, maybe, but I remember that a moment when it just all happened. But I'll try and answer your question with a slightly older child. How can you tell from a slightly older child if they can read or not? The acid test is the difference. Like a non-dyslexic, you can just say that says crocodile, and there you go. They'll remember it maybe the 5th or 6th time. Whereas with the dyslexic child, you're saying it for days and it's not going in. And whereas you say to the same child, you say crocodile, you look at that and say croc, and then they learn. As soon as you see that they need their own voice to learn, that they really need their own voice to learn, that they need that as a crutch, then that is going to be your dyslexic child who needs their voice as a crutch. If they seem to be very, very poor at remembering things that are said, unless they say them, you say, okay, what did I just say? Didn't say that. Say in your own words, so that I know you. And then you see a big difference in how well they remember things that they put into their own words. And that is really the acid test for it's the single difference
that's powerful.
You need to be aware of.
Thank you, Esther. So, how do people connect with you? So, if you work online? Do you have classes? If you tell us the name of your technique again, and what parents who are seeking support for their children with dyslexia contact you, what can they expect?
Well, over the last 25 years, I've had people coming here for an hour a week. Yeah, so the under 10s, they come here for an hour. So that's what used to happen. Students, and it's usually an hour. So it's just wherever they're up to, whatever they're doing. I'm just saying, well, then if you do it this way, you can stop worrying. Just make this tweak and you're okay. My aim is to get people back out the door as quickly as I can.
Thank you so much, Esther. That has really given us a really good example of what it's like to have dyslexia and the kinds of different techniques that you have that will, those who connect with you will find makes a difference with the sound and the meanings when they're doing their reading. And do you have any final words to say today?
Yeah, being dyslexic takes all your power away. These were lovely youngsters, and they were just getting sucked back into gangs again, and I was losing them. They weren't going on where they were supposed to be going. They were disappearing again. They'd been truanting from school. Dyslexics, certainly state school kids, will often start truanting at the age of 11 or 12. Nobody talks about that, but I know, because that's what was going on. And that was what was going on when I was teaching when I was the SENCO teaching, I had those 60 odd kids to teach to read, because they were coming back. And I don't think the head was very pleased, actually, but they were coming back. They had found out that somebody would teach them to read. And, and they were sending their sisters and their mothers to interview me. Was I for real? Was I going to teach them to read? Well, back they were coming. And so it's so important. I mean, prisons are full of dyslexic people that really, if you took all the dyslexic people out of prison, we'd have a really big housing problem, wouldn't we? But I am all too well aware that 1/4 of the UK kids are not reading at their own age when they get to secondary school. They're already struggling, and clearly these are dyslexic kids who need the techniques.
Thank you, Esther. And so I do want you to tell us the name of your technique again, and the name of your website, where those who want to connect with you will find you.
Okay. Own voice techniques, because it's your own voice. It's not just a voice. And it's not just you reciting, it's got to be your own voice, because then you're using your semantic processor with your sound processor. So own voice, so it's own voice techniques, and the website address is dyslexiatechniques.co.uk. So Dyslexia Techniques, no dot, just dyslexiatechniques.co.uk.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Esther.
Well, thank you. It's a great honour, Bola, and thank you. I think the universe, because it's such a weird thing, isn't it, that I just sent you this little draft of my book, and you went, "Oh, I want to hear more from this." So it's so serendipitous for us both, and yes. So the universe has given me you, and it's given you me, and I hope it's given everybody Dyslexia Techniques.
Thank you, Esther. Yes, I received that. This is really synchronicity, and I really cherish that. Thank you so much for joining us today, Esther. And I do want to thank those who are listening, who are watching, for joining us, and to ask you to subscribe to Daily Soul Bytes Show. We always have new episodes every Wednesday, and I look forward to seeing you next week on the Daily Soul Bytes Show. Bye-bye.